Chapter 13 of The Adventures of Pinocchio. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Chapter 13. Cat and Fox and Marionette walked and walked and walked. At last, toward evening, dead tired, they came to the Inn of the Red Lobster.
"Let us stop here a while," said the Fox, "to eat a bite and rest for a few hours. At midnight we'll start out again, for at dawn tomorrow we must be at the Field of Wonders."
They went into the inn and all three sat down at the same table. However, not one of them was very hungry. The poor Cat felt very weak, and he was able to eat only 35 mullets with tomato sauce and 4 portions of tripe with cheese. Moreover, as he was so in need of strength, he had to have 4 more helpings of butter and cheese. The Fox, after a great deal of coaxing, tried his best to eat a little. The doctor had put him on a diet, and he had to be satisfied with a small hare dressed with a dozen young and tender spring chickens. After the hare, he ordered some partridges, a few pheasants, a couple of rabbits, and a dozen frogs and lizards. That was all. He felt ill, he said, and could not eat another bite. Pinocchio ate least of all. He asked for a bite of bread and a few nuts, and then hardly touched them. The poor fellow, with his mind on the Field of Wonders, was suffering from a gold piece indigestion. Supper over, the Fox said to the innkeeper,
"Give us 2 good rooms, one for Mr. Pinocchio and the other for me and my friend. Before starting out, we'll take a little nap. Remember to call us at midnight sharp, for we must continue on our journey."
"Yes, sir," answered the innkeeper, winking in a knowing way at the Fox and the Cat, as if to say, "I understand." As soon as Pinocchio was in bed, he fell fast asleep and began to dream. He dreamed he was in the middle of a field. The field was full of vines heavy with grapes. The grapes were no other than gold coins which tinkled merrily as they swayed in the wind. They seemed to say, "Let him who wants us take us." Just as Pinocchio stretched out his hand to take a handful of them, he was awakened by 3 loud knocks at the door. It was the innkeeper who had come to tell him that midnight had struck. "Are my friends ready?" the Marionette asked him.
"Indeed, yes. They went 2 hours ago."
"Why in such a hurry?"
"Unfortunately, the Cat received a telegram which said that his firstborn was suffering from chilblains and was on the point of death. He could not even wait to say good bye to you."
"Did they pay for the supper?"
"How could they do such a thing? Being people of great refinement, they did not want to offend you so deeply as not to allow you the honor of paying the bill."
"Too bad. That offense would have been more than pleasing to me," said Pinocchio, scratching his head. "Where did my good friends say they would wait for me?" he added.
"At the Field of Wonders at sunrise tomorrow morning."
Pinocchio paid a gold piece for the 3 suppers and started on his way toward the field that was to make him a rich man. He walked on, not knowing where he was going, for it was dark, so dark that not a thing was visible. Round about him, not a leaf stirred. A few bats skimmed his nose now and again and scared him half to death. Once or twice he shouted, "Who goes there?" And the faraway hills echoed back to him, "Who goes there? Who goes there? Who goes?" As he walked, Pinocchio noticed a tiny insect glimmering on the trunk of a tree, a small being that glowed with a pale, soft light. "Who are you?" he asked.
"I am the ghost of the Talking Cricket,"
answered the little being in a faint voice that sounded as if it came from a faraway world. "What do you want?" asked the Marionette.
I want to give you a few words of good advice. Return home and give the 4 gold pieces you have left to your poor old father, who is weeping because he has not seen you for many a day. Tomorrow my father will be a rich man, for these 4 gold pieces will become 2,000. Don't listen to those who promise you wealth overnight, my boy. As a rule, they are either fools or swindlers. Listen to me and go home." "But I want to go on." "The hour is late." "I want to go on." "The night is very dark." "I want to go on." "The road is dangerous." "I want to go on." "Remember that boys who insist on having their own way sooner or later come to grief." "The same nonsense. Good bye, Cricket." "Good night, Pinocchio, and may Heaven preserve you from the assassins."
There was silence for a minute, and the light of the talking Cricket disappeared suddenly, just as if someone had snuffed it out. Once again, the road was plunged in darkness. End of chapter. Chapter 14 of The Adventures of Pinocchio. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Chapter 14.
"Dear, oh dear! When I come to think of it," said the Marionette to himself, as he once more set out on his journey, "we boys are really very unlucky. Everybody scolds us, everybody gives us advice, everybody warns us. If we were to allow it, everyone would try to be father and mother to us, everyone, even the talking Cricket. Take me, for example. Just because I would not listen to that bothersome Cricket, who knows how many misfortunes may be awaiting me? Assassins, indeed! At least I have never believed in them, nor ever will. To speak sensibly, I think assassins have been invented by fathers and mothers to frighten children who want to run away at night. And then, even if I were to meet them on the road, what matter? I'll just run up to them and say, 'Well, signori, what do you want? Remember that you can't fool with me. Run along and mind your business.' At such a speech, I can almost see those poor fellows running like the wind. But in case they don't run away, I can always run myself."
Pinocchio was not given time to argue any longer, for he thought he heard a slight rustle among the leaves behind him. He turned to look, and behold! There in the darkness stood 2 big black shadows, wrapped from head to foot in black sacks. The 2 figures leaped toward him as softly as if they were ghosts.
"Here they come,"
Pinocchio said to himself, and not knowing where to hide the gold pieces, he stuck all 4 of them under his tongue. He tried to run away, but hardly had he taken a step when he felt his arms grasped and heard 2 horrible, deep voices say to him,
"Your money or your life."
On account of the gold pieces in his mouth, Pinocchio could not say a word, so he tried with head and hands and body to show, as best as he could, that he was only a poor Marionette without a penny in his pocket.
"Come, come, less nonsense and out with your money!"
cried the 2 thieves in threatening voices. Once more Pinocchio's head and hands said, "I haven't a penny."
"Out with that money or you're a dead man,"
said the taller of the 2 assassins.
"Dead man,"
repeated the other.
"And after having killed you, we will kill your father also."
"Your father also."
"No, no, no, not my father!"
cried Pinocchio, wild with terror, but as he screamed, the gold pieces tinkled together in his mouth.
"Ah, you rascal! So that's the game! You have the money hidden under your tongue. Out with it!"
but Pinocchio was as stubborn as ever.
Are you deaf? Wait, young man, we'll get it from you in a twinkling.
One of them grabbed the Marionette by the nose and the other by the chin, and they pulled him unmercifully from side to side in order to make him open his mouth. All was of no use. The Marionette's lips might have been nailed together. They would not open. In desperation, the smaller of the two assassins pulled out a long knife from his pocket and tried to pry Pinocchio's mouth open with it. Quick as a flash, the Marionette sank his teeth deep into the assassin's hand, bit it off, and spat it out. Fancy his surprise when he saw that it was not a hand, but a cat's paw. Encouraged by this first victory, he freed himself from the claws of his assailers and, leaping over the bushes along the road, ran swiftly across the fields. His pursuers were after him at once, like two dogs chasing a hare. After running 7 miles or so, Pinocchio was well nigh exhausted. Seeing himself lost, he climbed up a giant pine tree and sat there to see what he could see. The assassins tried to climb also, but they slipped and fell. Far from giving up the chase, this only spurred them on. They gathered a bundle of wood, piled it up at the foot of the pine, and set fire to it. In a twinkling, the tree began to sputter and burn like a candle blown by the wind. Pinocchio saw the flames climb higher and higher. Not wishing to end his days as a roasted Marionette, he jumped quickly to the ground and off he went, the assassins close to him, as before. Dawn was breaking when, without any warning whatsoever, Pinocchio found his path barred by a deep pool full of water the color of muddy coffee. What was there to do? With a 1, 2, 3, he jumped clear across it. The assassins jumped also, but not having measured their distance well, splash! They fell right into the middle of the pool. Pinocchio, who heard the splash and felt it too, cried out laughing, but never stopping in his race, "A pleasant bath to you, signori!" He thought they must surely be drowned and turned his head to see. But there were the two somber figures still following him, though their black sacks were drenched and dripping with water. End of chapter. Chapter 15 of The Adventures of Pinocchio. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Chapter 15. As he ran, the Marionette felt more and more certain that he would have to give himself up into the hands of his pursuers. Suddenly, he saw a little cottage gleaming white as the snow among the trees of the forest. "If I have enough breath left with which to reach that little house, I may be saved," he said to himself. Not waiting another moment, he darted swiftly through the woods, the assassins still after him. After a hard race of almost an hour, tired and out of breath, Pinocchio finally reached the door of the cottage and knocked. No one answered. He knocked again, harder than before, for behind him he heard the steps and the labored breathing of his persecutors. The same silence followed. As knocking was of no use, Pinocchio, in despair, began to kick and bang against the door, as if he wanted to break it. At the noise, a window opened and a lovely maiden looked out. She had azure hair and a face white as wax. Her eyes were closed and her hands crossed on her breast. With a voice so weak that it could hardly be heard, she whispered, "No one lives in this house. Everyone is dead." "Won't you at least open the door for me?" cried Pinocchio in a beseeching voice. "I also am dead." "Dead? What are you doing at the window, then?" "I am waiting for the coffin to take me away." After these words, the little girl disappeared, and the window closed without a sound.
"Oh, lovely maiden with azure hair!" cried Pinocchio. "Open, I beg of you! Take pity on a poor boy who is being chased by two assass—"
He did not finish, for two powerful hands grasped him by the neck, and the same two horrible voices growled threateningly, "Now we have you!" The Marionette, seeing death dancing before him, trembled so hard that the joints of his legs rattled and the coins tinkled under his tongue. "Well," the Assassins asked, "will you open your mouth now or not? Ah, you do not answer. Very well, this time you shall open it." Taking out two long, sharp knives, they struck two heavy blows on the Marionette's back. Happily for him, Pinocchio was made of very hard wood, and the knives broke into 1,000 pieces. The Assassins looked at each other in dismay, holding the handles of the knives in their hands. "I understand," said one of them to the other. "There is nothing left to do now but to hang him."
To hang him, repeated the other.
They tied Pinocchio's hands behind his shoulders and slipped the noose around his neck. Throwing the rope over the high limb of a giant oak tree, they pulled till the poor Marionette hung far up in space. Satisfied with their work, they sat on the grass, waiting for Pinocchio to give his last gasp. But after 3 hours the Marionette's eyes were still open, his mouth still shut, and his legs kicked harder than ever. Tired of waiting, the Assassins called to him mockingly, "Goodbye till tomorrow. When we return in the morning, we hope you'll be polite enough to let us find you dead and gone, and with your mouth wide open." With these words, they went. A few minutes went by, and then a wild wind started to blow. As it shrieked and moaned, the poor little sufferer was blown to and fro like the hammer of a bell. The rocking made him seasick, and the noose, becoming tighter and tighter, choked him. Little by little, a film covered his eyes. Death was creeping nearer and nearer, and the Marionette still hoped for some good soul to come to his rescue, but no one appeared. As he was about to die, he thought of his poor old father, and hardly conscious of what he was saying, murmured to himself, "Oh, Father, dear Father, if you were only here!" These were his last words. He closed his eyes, opened his mouth, stretched out his legs, and hung there as if he were dead. End of chapter. Chapter 16 of The Adventures of Pinocchio. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Chapter 16. If the poor Marionette had dangled there much longer, all hope would have been lost. Luckily for him, the lovely maiden with azure hair once again looked out of her window. Filled with pity at the sight of the poor little fellow being knocked helplessly about by the wind, she clapped her hands sharply together 3 times. At the signal, a loud whir of wings in quick flight was heard, and a large falcon came and settled itself on the window ledge. "What do you command, my charming Fairy?" asked the Falcon, bending his beak in deep reverence. For it must be known that, after all, the lovely maiden with azure hair was none other than a very kind Fairy who had lived for more than 1,000 years in the vicinity of the forest. "Do you see that Marionette hanging from the limb of that giant oak tree?" "I see him." "Very well. Fly immediately to him. With your strong beak,
break the knot which holds him tied, take him down, and lay him softly on the grass at the foot of the oak."
The Falcon flew away and after 2 minutes returned, saying, "I have done what you have commanded."
"How did you find him, alive or dead?"
"At first glance, I thought he was dead. But I found I was wrong, for as soon as I loosened the knot around his neck, he gave a long sigh and mumbled with a faint voice, 'Now I feel better.'" The Fairy clapped her hands twice. A magnificent Poodle appeared, walking on its hind legs just like a man. He was dressed in court livery. A tricorn trimmed with gold lace was set at a rakish angle over a wig of white curls that dropped down to his waist. He wore a jaunty coat of chocolate-colored velvet, with diamond buttons, and with 2 huge pockets which were always filled with bones, dropped there at dinner by his loving mistress. Breeches of crimson velvet, silk stockings, and low, silver-buckled slippers completed his costume. His tail was encased in a blue silk covering, which was to protect it from the rain.
"Come, Madero," said the Fairy to him. "Get my best coach ready and set out toward the forest. On reaching the oak tree, you will find a poor, half dead Marionette stretched out on the grass. Lift him up tenderly, place him on the silken cushions of the coach, and bring him here to me."
The Poodle, to show that he understood, wagged his silk-covered tail 2 or 3 times and set off at a quick pace. In a few minutes, a lovely little coach, made of glass, with lining as soft as whipped cream and chocolate pudding, and stuffed with canary feathers, pulled out of the stable. It was drawn by 100 pairs of white mice, and the Poodle sat on the coachman's seat and snapped his whip gaily in the air, as if he were a real coachman in a hurry to get to his destination. In a quarter of an hour, the coach was back. The Fairy, who was waiting at the door of the house, lifted the poor little Marionette in her arms, took him to a dainty room with mother-of-pearl walls, put him to bed, and sent immediately for the most famous doctors of the neighborhood to come to her. One after another the doctors came, a Crow, an Owl, and a talking Cricket.
"I should like to know, Signore,"
said the Fairy, turning to the 3 doctors gathered about Pinocchio's bed,
"I should like to know if this poor Marionette is dead or alive."
At this invitation, the Crow stepped out and felt Pinocchio's pulse, his nose, his little toe. Then he solemnly pronounced the following words:
"To my mind, this Marionette is dead and gone. But if by any evil chance he were not, then that would be a sure sign that he is still alive."
"I am sorry," said the Owl, "to have to contradict the Crow, my famous friend and colleague. To my mind, this Marionette is alive. But if, by any evil chance, he were not, then that would be a sure sign that he is wholly dead."
"And do you hold any opinion?"
the Fairy asked the talking Cricket.
"I say that a wise doctor, when he does not know what he is talking about, should know enough to keep his mouth shut. However, that Marionette is not a stranger to me. I have known him a long time."
Pinocchio, who until then had been very quiet, shuddered so hard that the bed shook.
"That Marionette," continued the talking Cricket, "is a rascal of the worst kind."
Pinocchio opened his eyes and closed them again.
"He is rude, lazy, a runaway."
Pinocchio hid his face under the sheets.
"That Marionette is a disobedient son who is breaking his father's heart."
Long shuddering sobs were heard, cries and deep sighs. Think how surprised everyone was when, on raising the sheets, they discovered Pinocchio half melted in tears.
"When the dead weep, they are beginning to recover," said the Crow solemnly.
"I am sorry to contradict my famous friend and colleague," said the Owl, "but as far as I'm concerned, I think that when the dead weep, it means they do not want to die."
End of chapter. Chapter 17 of The Adventures of Pinocchio. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Chapter 17. As soon as the three doctors had left the room, the Fairy went to Pinocchio's bed and, touching him on the forehead, noticed that he was burning with fever. She took a glass of water, put a white powder into it, and handing it to the Marionette, said lovingly to him, "Drink this, and in a few days you'll be up and well." Pinocchio looked at the glass, made a wry face, and asked in a whining voice, "Is it sweet or bitter?" "It is bitter, but it is good for you."
If it is bitter, I don't want it.
"Drink it."
I don't like anything bitter.
"Drink it, and I'll give you a lump of sugar to take the bitter taste from your mouth."
Where's the sugar?
"Here it is," said the Fairy, taking a lump from a golden sugar bowl.
I want the sugar first, then I'll drink the bitter water.
"Do you promise?"
Yes.
The Fairy gave him the sugar, and Pinocchio, after chewing and swallowing it in a twinkling, said, smacking his lips,
If only sugar were medicine, I should take it every day.
"Now keep your promise and drink these few drops of water. They'll be good for you." Pinocchio took the glass in both hands and stuck his nose into it. He lifted it to his mouth and once more stuck his nose into it.
It is too bitter, much too bitter. I can't drink it.
"How do you know when you haven't even tasted it?"
I can imagine it. I smell it. I want another lump of sugar, then I'll drink it.
The Fairy, with the patience of a good mother, gave him more sugar and again handed him the glass.
I can't drink it like that,
the Marionette said, making more wry faces.
Why? Because that feather pillow on my feet bothers me.
The Fairy took away the pillow.
It's no use. I can't drink it even now.
What's the matter now?
I don't like the way that door looks. It's half open.
The Fairy closed the door.
I won't drink it,
cried Pinocchio, bursting out crying.
I won't drink this awful water. I won't. I won't. No, 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 no.
My boy, you'll be sorry.
I don't care.
You are very sick.
I don't care.
In a few hours, the fever will take you far away to another world.
I don't care.
Aren't you afraid of death?
Not a bit. I'd rather die than drink that awful medicine.
At that moment, the door of the room flew open and in came 4 rabbits as black as ink, carrying a small black coffin on their shoulders.
What do you want from me?
asked Pinocchio.
"We have come for you,"
said the largest rabbit.
For me? But I'm not dead yet.
"No, not dead yet, but you will be in a few moments since you have refused to take the medicine which would have made you well."
Oh, Fairy, my Fairy, the Marionette cried out. Give me that glass, quick, please. I don't want to die. No, no, not yet. Not yet.
and holding the glass with his two hands he swallowed the medicine at one gulp. "Well," said the four rabbits, "this time we have made the trip for nothing." And turning on their heels, they marched solemnly out of the room, carrying their little black coffin and muttering and grumbling between their teeth. In a twinkling, Pinocchio felt fine. With one leap he was out of bed and into his clothes. The Fairy, seeing him run and jump around the room gay as a bird on wings, said to him: "My medicine was good for you after all, wasn't it?" "Good indeed! It has given me new life." "Why, then, did I have to beg you so hard to make you drink it?" "I'm a boy, you see, and all boys hate medicine more than they do sickness." "What a shame! Boys ought to know, after all, that medicine, taken in time, can save them from much pain and even from death." "Next time I won't have to be begged so hard. I'll remember those black rabbits with the black coffin on their shoulders, and I'll take the glass and poof! Down it will go." "Come here now and tell me how it came about that you found yourselves in the hands of the assassins." "It happened that Fire Eater gave me 5 gold pieces to give to my father, but on the way I met a Fox and a Cat, who asked me, 'Do you want the 5 pieces to become 2,000?' And I said, 'Yes.' And they said, 'Come with us to the Field of Wonders.' And I said, 'Let's go.' Then they said, 'Let us stop at the Inn of the Red Lobster for dinner, and after midnight we'll set out again.' We ate and went to sleep. When I awoke, they were gone, and I started out in the darkness all alone. On the road I met 2 assassins dressed in black coal sacks, who said to me, 'Your money or your life.' And I said, 'I haven't any money,' for, you see, I had put the money under my tongue. One of them tried to put his hand in my mouth, and I bit it off and spat it out, but it wasn't a hand, it was a cat's paw. And they ran after me and I ran and ran, till at last they caught me and tied my neck with a rope and hanged me to a tree, saying, 'Tomorrow we'll come back for you, and you'll be dead, and your mouth will be open, and then we'll take the gold pieces that you have hidden under your tongue.'" "Where are the gold pieces now?" the Fairy asked. "I lost them," answered Pinocchio, but he told a lie, for he had them in his pocket. As he spoke, his nose, long though it was, became at least 2 inches longer. "And where did you lose them?" "In the wood near by." At this second lie, his nose grew a few more inches. "If you lost them in the nearby wood," said the Fairy, "we'll look for them and find them, for everything that is lost there is always found." "Ah, now I remember," replied the Marionette, becoming more and more confused. "I did not lose the gold pieces, but I swallowed them when I drank the medicine." At this third lie, his nose became longer than ever, so long that he could not even turn around. If he turned to the right, he knocked it against the bed or into the window panes. If he turned to the left, he struck the walls or the door. If he raised it a bit, he almost put the Fairy's eyes out. The Fairy sat looking at him and laughing. "Why do you laugh?" the Marionette asked her, worried now at the sight of his growing nose. "I am laughing at your lies." "How do you know I'm lying?" "Lies, my boy, are known in a moment. There are 2 kinds of lies, lies with short legs and lies with long noses. Yours, just now, happen to have long noses." Pinocchio, not knowing where to hide his shame, tried to escape from the room, but his nose had become so long that he could not get it out of the door. End of chapter. Chapter 18 of The Adventures of Pinocchio. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Chapter 18. Crying as if his heart would break, the Marionette mourned for hours over the length of his nose. No matter how he tried, it would not go through the door. The Fairy showed no pity toward him, as she was trying to teach him a good lesson, so that he would stop telling lies, the worst habit any boy may acquire. But when she saw him, pale with fright and his eyes half out of his head with terror, she began to feel sorry for him and clapped her hands together. 1,000 woodpeckers flew in through the window and settled themselves on Pinocchio's nose. They pecked and pecked so hard at that enormous nose that in a few moments it was the same size as before. "How good you are, my Fairy," said Pinocchio, drying his eyes, "and how much I love you." "I love you, too," answered the Fairy. "And if you wish to stay with me, you may be my little brother, and I'll be your good little sister." "I should like to stay, but what about my poor father?" "I have thought of everything. Your father has been sent for, and before night he will be here." "Really?" cried Pinocchio joyfully. "Then, my good Fairy, if you are willing, I should like to go to meet him. I cannot wait to kiss that dear old man who has suffered so much for my sake." "Surely. Go ahead. But be careful not to lose your way. Take the wood path and you'll surely meet him." Pinocchio set out, and as soon as he found himself in the wood, he ran like a hare. When he reached the giant oak tree, he stopped, for he thought he heard a rustle in the brush. He was right. There stood the Fox and the Cat, the two traveling companions with whom he had eaten at the Inn of the Red Lobster.
"Here comes our dear Pinocchio!" cried the Fox, hugging and kissing him. "How did you happen here?"
"How did you happen here?" repeated the Cat.
"It is a long story," said the Marionette. "Let me tell it to you. The other night, when you left me alone at the inn, I met the assassins on the road."
"The assassins! Oh, my poor friend! And what did they want?"
"They wanted my gold pieces."
"Rascals!"
said the Fox.
"The worst sort of rascals," added the Cat.
"But I began to run," continued the Marionette, "and they after me, until they overtook me and hanged me to the limb of that oak." Pinocchio pointed to the giant oak near by.
"Could anything be worse?" said the Fox. "What an awful world to live in! Where shall we find a safe place for gentlemen like ourselves?"
As the Fox talked thus, Pinocchio noticed that the Cat carried his right paw in a sling. "What happened to your paw?" he asked. The Cat tried to answer, but he became so terribly twisted in his speech that the Fox had to help him out.
"My friend is too modest to answer. I'll answer for him. About an hour ago, we met an old wolf on the road. He was half starved and begged for help. Having nothing to give him, what do you think my friend did out of the kindness of his heart? With his teeth, he bit off the paw of his front foot and threw it at that poor beast, so that he might have something to eat."
As he spoke, the Fox wiped off a tear. Pinocchio, almost in tears himself, whispered in the Cat's ear, "If all the cats were like you, how lucky the mice would be."
"And what are you doing here?"
the Fox asked the Marionette. "I am waiting for my father, who will be here at any moment now."
"And your gold pieces?"
"I still have them in my pocket, except one which I spent at the Inn of the Red Lobster."
To think that those 4 gold pieces might become 2,000 tomorrow! Why don't you listen to me? Why don't you sow them in the field of wonders?"
"Today it is impossible. I'll go with you some other time."
"Another day will be too late," said the Fox.
"Why?"
"Because that field has been bought by a very rich man, and today is the last day that it will be open to the public."
"How far is this field of wonders?"
"Only 2 miles away. Will you come with us? We'll be there in half an hour. You can sow the money, and after a few minutes, you will gather your 2,000 coins and return home rich. Are you coming?"
Pinocchio hesitated a moment before answering, for he remembered the good fairy, old Geppetto, and the advice of the Talking Cricket. Then he ended by doing what all boys do when they have no heart and little brain. He shrugged his shoulders and said to the Fox and the Cat, "Let us go. I am with you." And they went. They walked and walked for a half a day at least, and at last they came to the town called the City of Simple Simons. As soon as they entered the town, Pinocchio noticed that all the streets were filled with hairless dogs yawning from hunger, with sheared sheep trembling with cold, with combless chickens begging for a grain of wheat, with large butterflies unable to use their wings because they had sold all their lovely colors, with tailless peacocks ashamed to show themselves, and with bedraggled pheasants scuttling away hurriedly, grieving for their bright feathers of gold and silver, lost to them forever. Through this crowd of paupers and beggars, a beautiful coach passed now and again. Within it sat either a fox, a hawk, or a vulture. "Where is the Field of Wonders?" asked Pinocchio, growing tired of waiting.
"Be patient. It is only a few more steps away."
They passed through the city and, just outside the walls, they stepped into a lonely field, which looked more or less like any other field.
"Here we are," said the Fox to the Marionette. "Dig a hole here and put the gold pieces into it."
The Marionette obeyed. He dug the hole, put the 4 gold pieces into it, and covered them up very carefully.
"Now," said the Fox, "go to that nearby brook, bring back a pail full of water, and sprinkle it over the spot."
Pinocchio followed the directions closely, but, as he had no pail, he pulled off his shoe, filled it with water, and sprinkled the earth which covered the gold. Then he asked, "Anything else?"
"Nothing else," answered the Fox. "Now we can go. Return here within 20 minutes and you will find the vine grown and the branches filled with gold pieces."
Pinocchio, beside himself with joy, thanked the Fox and the Cat many times and promised them each a beautiful gift.
"We don't want any of your gifts," answered the 2 rogues. "It is enough for us that we have helped you to become rich with little or no trouble. For this, we are as happy as kings."
They said goodbye to Pinocchio and, wishing him good luck, went on their way. End of chapter.